Well, peace talks between the U.S. and the Taliban are resuming today in Qatar, as diplomats say they are coming close to ending the 18-year war in Afghanistan. Despite the reported progress, the country has seen an uptick in violence in recent months. The Taliban has ordered several attacks on its rivals, and ISIS has also carried out bombings. Now the terror group's activities could complicate the Taliban's efforts to get the U.S. to pull out of the country. Imtiaz Tayyab reports from Doha, Qatar.
This is the latest and possibly last round of talks between the Taliban and the United States. But the brutal bombing of a wedding in Kabul is at the top of everyone's minds here. Agony in Afghanistan as the death toll from this weekend's massacre rises to 80. ISIS is claiming responsibility for the suicide attack, casting the longest of shadows over talks between U.S. negotiators who are back in Doha for what they're hoping is a final round of mediations with the Taliban aimed at ending America's longest war. 14,000 U.S. soldiers remain in Afghanistan. Withdrawing them is a key Taliban demand, while Washington wants guarantees Afghan soil won't be used by militant groups as a staging ground for global terror attacks, like al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden did before 9/11, which is perhaps why President Trump's other demand, leaving U.S. intelligence agents on the ground, in part to monitor ISIS, remains a key sticking point. Speaking yesterday to Gayle King, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said defeating the extremist group remains a top priority.
Is it gaining strength, in your opinion?
It's complicated. There's certainly places where ISIS is more powerful today than they were 3 or 4 years ago. But the caliphate is gone, and their capacity to conduct external attacks has been made much more difficult.
Even if a deal is reached, this isn't the end. A new phase of negotiations will begin in Norway, this time between the Taliban and the Afghan government. But these talks may prove even harder, because unlike U.S. forces who get to leave, these warring sides will have to figure out a way to live with each other in peace. Imtiaz Tayyab, CBS News, Doha.
And for more on this, let's bring in Asha Castleberry. She's a national security and foreign policy expert and U.S. Army veteran, and she currently teaches at George Washington University's Political Science Department. Asha is with me now on set. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, geographically, the president has said that ISIS is defeated. Secretary Pompeo has said that the caliphate is gone, but the ideology still seems to be there. Do you think that the administration is downplaying the threat of ISIS?
Well, what we have seen within the past year is a resurgence of ISIS, especially in Syria, where they are now engaged in a multi-layer counteroffensive. Also in Iraq, where our local partners in some areas are failing to hold on these areas, so ISIS has been able to regain those areas, as well as in Afghanistan, what we call Daesh K or ISIS-K, where we try to target them, where we use the mother of all bombs. So they're pretty much spread out and still strong to this day.
And that's not to mention a lot of the terror cells across Africa, for instance, who pledge allegiance to groups like ISIS. So, you know, how has ISIS been able to gain strength after this long, battle back and forth, a heavy bombing campaign by the U.S. and its allies? How have they been able to regain this strength?
Well, despite the loss of territory, the messaging still survives. They've been able to still maintain strong propaganda, and through that they've been able to still maintain a lot of international financial support, which enables them to reconstitute their capabilities that they have lost from a lot of counteroffensives. So, and in some areas too as well, where we don't necessarily have coalition presence, they have been able to reemerge in those areas, and you could see that definitely in the northern eastern part of Syria, some parts of Iraq, and definitely in some parts of Afghanistan, where the Taliban are also located as well.
Now, so looking forward to any sort of troop removal in Afghanistan, we've seen that ISIS, has operations in parts of that country. How do you think that will shake out?
That will definitely be to our detriment. I would recommend during current negotiations that the United States should get the Taliban as well as the Afghan government, who has recently said they'll pledge to go against ISIS, to work together to go against ISIS. I don't really hear too much about the United States getting the Taliban to counter ISIS, but that needs to be part of negotiations. And of course, downsizing U.S. presence will allow them to fill in that vacuum and continue to spread throughout the country.
You know, we've seen an uptick in violence, specifically in Afghanistan and in certain regions of the country. A lot of civilian casualties. It's certainly not quieting down. Do you think that there is an exit strategy in any world? Is there an exit strategy that doesn't lead to a resurgence of ISIS or another extremist militant group?
There is a desire in state to have an exit strategy, but unfortunately, in terms of the pace of the Afghan security forces, they cannot independently work against these threats. They need the coalition in place to enable them, so pulling away from them will create a more destabilized environment. So already these counterattacks are hitting strongholds with the coalition in there, so it's already a complex environment to operate in as far as trying to counter ISIS attacks. So without that coalition support, it will be a lot more difficult because the Afghan security forces can't do it on its own.
Yeah, we've certainly seen a lot of some tragic situations playing out in Afghanistan. Asha Castleberry, thank you very much.